just providing people with that outlet to escape a little and enjoy themselves. Um, Even if I wasn't feeding folks, even if my kids weren't doing it anymore, I think that that would be what would keep me coming back is seeing the reaction on people's faces when they're enjoying themselves.
Well, we made it. This is the final episode of season 2. It's been a great season with lots of interesting guests. Some areas and things that I really didn't know about, and always great people that I get to talk to. And my last guest of the season is my good friend, Patti Duncan. Patti and I worked together at Discovery Education for years. Spent a lot of evenings, dinners, and conversations talking about all kinds of things, and we became very, very good friends. This particular aspect of her life, the Renaissance Faire involvement, is not something that I really completely understood. Always probably saw it as a little bit of a strange passion, and she readily admits that it is kind of an odd thing, but it's a really fascinating thing to be involved with, and a passion that started with her kids and now is just something that she's committed to uh, on her own. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Patti Duncan.
So Patti Duncan started her career as an educator in 1996. I was a food chemist before that, and for one reason or another, was changing out of that profession. And my boss said to me, "You know, you're supposed to be a teacher, right?" And I said, "Well, because my father had been a teacher, so I was like, I don't know if I'm going to follow in the footsteps, kind of thing." But I did. I jumped in and started teaching chemistry, and I taught chemistry for 14 years prior to coming to Discovery Education in 2008. And ever since then, I've worked with educators on a daily basis, doing all kinds of things and helping educators not only use Discovery Education, but just good classroom strategies, things around STEM thinking, all of that fun stuff. I'm an educator by nature, I think.
You are, and I always can't help but picturing you in a white lab coat. That's kind of what my what my vision of Patti
It
Duncan
is the
is. In a white
iconic
lab coat,
picture of
doing
Patty.
some weird experiment, making something blow up, explode, or expand, or contract, or do something, have some sort of chemical reaction.
I know a lot of people who call themselves, who have done the transitions like we have, who call themselves former teachers, and I just can't bring myself to do it. And I also don't call myself a former scientist. It's just
That's right. Sure.
who you are.
Yeah, you are still. No, and absolutely are that. So, um, you and I have known each other since our our days at Discovery, these many years ago. During that time, I got to know you on a personal level, and like, oh, Patty has this, and I don't want to say. I use the word weird because that's just a generic term for anything I don't understand. And that's perhaps not the best, but um, you have a particular passion, and it involves costumes and it involves all kinds of things that I know little about. So tell me a little bit about your where did this passion for Renaissance fairs and how did that start?
Sure. So it started, to be quite honest, the way it does for a lot of people our age, and that is my kids were into it, right? So, well, I mean, I went when I was in college as a fun day, excuse to drink and dress up and be silly. But then we didn't go for years until 2010. We took my kids, who were teenagers at the time, to experience the Ren Fair. And my one son fell in love with the concept and wanted to be part of the cast. So he tried out for the cast, but because he was a minor, he needed to have a parent there with him. So his dad and I took turns being around every weekend for like 8 weeks in a row. Um, while he participated. And then the next year, my other son joined, and the next year, my daughter joined, and it became a family thing that we just, started doing. So we've been doing it for 12 years now, and we are at that point now where if my kids quit, I'd probably keep doing it. Um,
So
it's
how
just
would
fun.
you? Yeah. So first, let me just maybe we need to just take one step back and talk about like what is a Renaissance Fair? Is it simply an event, or is there something else that goes with it? So give us the overview of the Renaissance Fair slash experience.
I think it differs, right? There are some places where it's a single weekend event, and there are some places where it's a 9 week season. So the Ren fairs that I do two now. One in Hudson Valley, New York, and one in Tuxedo, New York. They're long seasons, 8, 9 week ends in a row, plus rehearsal beforehand. And depending again on what state fair, what event it is, sometimes it's people rent out like a field and pitch a bunch of tents and do some singing and dancing and acting out like they're in the Renaissance period, Old England usually. And there's usually vendors who sell turkey legs and moccasins and things that go along with the costuming. Um, there's often things like jousts and horses and bawdy songs with wenches and those kinds of things. And again, it all depends. There's a big fair here in Pennsylvania where I live, down in the Lancaster area. It's on the land of a winery, and they have a permanent. It's like a town, and when they're not in fair season, the town's just closed. The one I'm in right now in New York Tuxedo is the same thing. Others have temporary areas that they kind of set up, and then they break it all down at the end. So it depends, but in general, it's a place we like to say at the Tuxedo Fair that it's like where fantasy comes to life. And it's essentially a place where there's a lot of escapism, right? There's a lot of people who come to pretend they're someplace else for the day and just put everything else aside. And I also think right now there's a lot of younger folks, and by younger folks I mean 20s and 30s, who are just really into pretending to be somebody else, right? They cosplay and they put the costumes on, and they intermingle the Renaissance Fair experience with their other passions like Dungeons and Dragons and Doctor
Right.
Who, and it's just all about being somebody else on the weekend so that I
So
don't have to think
how
about
does
it.
it differ from like a Civil War reenactment? What's the difference? Is it because there's not an audience, or what's the key difference
Yeah, I
in
think,
terms of
I
the
mean, I've
format?
seen Civil War reenactments with audiences, right?
Okay.
But they tend to, the reenactors, from my experience, they'll tell you their big difference is that they're trying to be super uber historical, and that the passion for them is getting that historical piece right and reenacting something, but they're still putting on costumes and playing with
Sure.
weapons and fighting each other and doing that. They're just not doing it theatrically, typically. Ren Fair is a little bit more theatrical, and it has more of a variety of types of things that are happening.
What kind of research or knowledge do you have to have? Like a person that, oh, I just want to do it. Like, can you just step in, or is it like, okay, before you do that, you got to watch these movies and read these books, and like, what do you mean?
Every fair is different. So there's a fair in Connecticut that's all Robin Hood themed. And there are fairs. Our fair is circles around Queen Elizabeth, right? And her time and what she did. There's fair in Virginia, has a totally different theme. The one in Pennsylvania. So every fair is different. Tends to help if you know and or understand Shakespeare. Not always, but a lot of times. Um, and it also depends on whether or not the writers of the scripts for the fair work in real characters, right? So we have Sir Francis Drake, and we have other character. We have a Robin Hood and a Maid Marian, and this year instead of Little John, we have Little Joan, and this year our Sheriff of Nottingham is a female. So we take those historical characters and bend them just a little, depending on, the whole business of mixing it up and making it a little bit more exciting, because you can't do the same thing every year. Um, so I think it depends on the fair, really. And people who are into it from a perspective of being on what we call the home cast, which is the main storyline cast, they get to know the fairs that they're involved in. And they typically, most folks are only involved in their home casts, where they live. But there are other people, what we call like the variety acts. Like, for example, we have a variety act called Cirque de Sewer, and she does acrobatics with rats and cats. Right now, she'll travel to all the fairs because she's not attached to the theme of the fair. She's just a cool show that people want to see. Right.
So that
So,
can work sort of as a standalone or whatever.
correct. Yeah. And she could probably do that in other venues. She just has to change her clothes.
So if I were to go to one of these fairs as an attendee, audience, what would that be like? Like, what describe my experience as a first time attendee?
So, you would walk in, like there's typically some sort of pre-gate event that introduces you to the theme of the day or whatever's happening and sets the tone. There's lots of smells. Lots of, because we're outside, there's lots of cooking and barbecuing and smoking and just like a state fair, like every 5 feet there might be another booth with another cool food you can't get anywhere else. Soup in a bowl and turkey legs and meat on a stick and all these fun things. And then there's lots of sites. We at our fair do something called the gauntlet, the morning gauntlet and the afternoon or evening gauntlet, which essentially is all of the characters in costume line the road and greet people on the way in, and we say goodbye to them on the way out. Right. And that's, essentially to set the tone. Now at our fair in Tuxedo, we work really hard to make it seem like you're entering our town. It's a festival day. The queen's coming for a visit. You're entering our town. So my son Matt plays a character named Maud Delance, and he's the Shire landscaper. And so when you walk in, you might see him kneeling at the edge of the road, feather dusting the road and cleaning it up because the queen is coming. And you might walk down a little bit further and you'd see the sheriff's guards, hassling the villagers, and you would see the shepherdess walking around with a stuffed sheep on her head, and the apothecary, helping somebody with some potions or whatever. And we just kind of try to go about our day, especially when we're moving from location to location, the way we would move in character and talk to each other about our day and what we're doing and that kind of thing. My character is the caretaker of the chessboard. So we have something called a living chessboard. And that's where we have some battles with swords and shields and rods and stuff. And it's my job to take care of that space and the people who fight on it. And I'm also the caretaker for the Robin Hood band. So I'm often following them around and making sure that they're not getting hurt and that kind of stuff. But when I'm not taking care of that space or or the Robin Hood band themselves and doing something, during a battle, then you might see me sitting on a bench snapping peas or knitting with giant knitting needles or something, because that's what I do during the day.
And as a participant, it's like going to any other theme park. I come and go as I please. Like, it's not like a fixed time. It doesn't. I don't attend for an hour and a half. It's not like a performance that it's defined time
There are times, there's a schedule, and if you're following
within the
the
event. But if I
storyline,
want to go, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay.
yeah, if you're following the storyline, then you're going to want to be there from the beginning to the end, because there's something that happens about every hour and a half with the storyline. And there's typically, in most fairs, there's more than one storyline, right? So there might be the Robin Hood storyline, and then the queen has her own storyline. And then we have the jousts, which happen 3 times during the day, and they also have progressions. So, and that again, there's a little bit of business going on there, right? You can't do it all in one day, so you have to come back. And so there's that. But the idea there is that there's a little bit for everyone. Some people just come and shop, right? Because there's so
Hmm.
many cool places to shop, and
Right.
candles and pewter and clothes, lots of clothes. Some people just come to eat. We also have a lot of for lack of a better way of putting it, mechanical rides for the kids, like things that people push and swirl and things like that. So there, some people bring their kids and that's all they get to do all day is take their kids on the rides. So it depends on what you're into. And that's part of it,
Right.
I think, is
But lots.
providing
Yeah.
enough different things.
Yeah. So when you think about the time and energy like, what is it that you get from this volunteer time commitment that sort of, I don't know, like I often ask, well, like, how does it feed your soul?
That's a really good question. I think that that for me has evolved over the years, right? Like I said, when I started doing it, I was doing it to support my kids. They wanted to be there, so I needed to be there. Um, I entertained a lot when I was younger, when I was in high school and college, and I had to step away from it when I had kids because it wasn't something I had time for. So there's a little bit of that um feeding the entertainment bug, if you will, interacting with people. As you know, I like to do that. Um, I also, I like I said, I do two fairs now, back to back. One starts in April, goes to July. One starts in August, goes to October. And the August to October one, I also feed folks. I feed the cast over the course of the weekend. We camp, and a lot of the cast doesn't necessarily, it's not an easy way to take care. There's no really facility for them to cook or anything. So I run a co-op and I feed people, which is another thing that fills my soul, right? So but I really do think just providing people with that outlet to escape a little and enjoy themselves. Um, Even if I wasn't feeding folks, even if my kids weren't doing it anymore, I think that that would be what would keep me coming back is seeing the reaction on people's faces when they're enjoying themselves.
Well, as you're speaking about that, I know I can think right away of how that, certainly aligns with your personality and your work as an educator. But let me just frame that question a little more clearly. How, and maybe it doesn't, like how does your work in Ren Fair contribute to you as a teacher, as an educator? And or maybe it doesn't, because there's a lot of people that I talk to, like they like doing this thing simply because, like you mentioned, escapism. Like that's part of it. I do it because it's so different from my job, and I want it to be an escape, and I don't necessarily have to make it connect back to them. But at the same time, most educators that I know are always making connections between, all kinds of things they do, and oh, that's just like this. And again, feel free to say it's purely escape and that's why I do it, or how does it impact and has it sort of impacted you as an educator, and what's it taught you, or how's it helped you?
It's funny that you asked that because I could probably think of a dozen or more people off the top of my head who I work with at Ren Fair who are also educators. Now, that is in part because the summer frees them up a little bit to participate, right? But I also think it's in the nature. It's in the nature of um, providing people with something. Um, and that might be like as an educator, yes, it's important for me to people understand that my students understand chemistry or that they think critically and they utilize the skills that I present to them in a way that's going to help them. But one of the things that makes me the educator that I am is just providing people with fill in the blank, like a giver, if you will, for lack of a better putting. Not that all educators are givers, but that for some of us, it's what brings us to the vocation, right? And so I think that this is just another way of providing an audience of people with whatever it is they need that day. And in some ways, for me, that's not just the people who are coming in the gates, it's also my cast. It's also the kids that I'm taking
Sure.
care of. I don't get to take care of kids in the classroom anymore, but I've got 50 kids I feed and I take care of and I check in on them all day long. And I think that for me, that's part of what I'm bringing there. And I think that comes from that same gene, if you will,
Right.
that makes me
Yeah.
an educator.
Yeah, definitely makes sense to me. That's easy. So the last question is, what is there anything else that you would want people to know about Ren Fair that you didn't have a chance to say already? Like what other questions should I have asked you about Ren Fair?
I think that the most important thing that I think that people can know about Ren Fair is that you do participate in whatever level you're comfortable with. And often it is that opportunity for you to kind of find the weirdness um, that you might be afraid to use, like in your day, in school, or in your job, or whatever it might be. But that weirdness is in you. And I'm not offended by the word weirdness. As a matter of fact, everything goes in our Ren Fair, right? We've got folks wearing tails, we've got folks in costumes of all kinds. The Trekkies come, the Star Wars people come, everyone comes dressed in costume as an opportunity to kind of feel that little bit of validation in whatever it is that they want to have validated. So just, I think educators work so hard at what they do on a day-to-day basis that you have to have some sort of outlet and not be afraid. And that's one of the things that I love about Ren Fairs too, is because there's a lot of them, and in different places. Sometimes you can travel away from your hometown a little and go someplace for the weekend and be somebody completely different that you can't be in your classroom. And so I think that if there's any message, it's like, if this kind of thing appeals to you, just find it. It's out there.
Well, definitely sounds like something that I think a lot of people would find interesting. So I guess we're encouraging them to find their local Ren Fair and give it a go. Well,
Indeed.
thanks, Patty, so much for taking time. I know it's been a long time since we've chatted, and I'm glad you're able to come on and just share a little bit.
You're welcome, Dean. Thank you for asking.
Okay, see you soon.
Fare thee well.